Welcome everyone, Christine here with my Greenskin leveling guide for Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empire. Is going to be covering the Legendary Lords, the regular Lords, as well as the heroes using Total War Planner. Let's start with Grimgor Ironhide, the strongest of the Greenskin Legendary Lords. Well, as you start the campaign and as you gain the first few skills, you should always get Rune Marcher Inspiring Presence into the Gobos. Even if you're not going to use Goblin melee units later on, because eventually you will replace the Nasty Skulkers with Black Orcs and Trolls, you still want this benefit because the ammunition benefit that you're going to use for Goblin and Night Goblin missile units with Goblin Archers early on, Night Goblin Archers and Night Goblin Fanatic Archers later on, is very much worth it. It's always a smart idea when it comes to skill lines to always think ahead as opposed to just the early game. Though you can always spend points in early game units if you're going to stronghold campaign. But for the Greenskins, going with the Gobos always makes sense because those are units you're going to use early on, so the melee attack is going to benefit your nasty, or the melee defense and melee attack is always going to benefit your Goblin Nasty Skulkers, and the ammunition missile strength is always going to benefit your Goblin units throughout the campaign. Now at this point, as with many other Legendary Lords, what you'd want to do is save up until you're rank 12. So after you finish spending these skills, just wait until you're rank 12, then get the special skill line. This is especially true for Grimgor, and then spend other points. Now this tool doesn't allow me to replicate that, so what would I spend the points after rank 12? Well, with Grimgor, I would get Dead Hard, because Grimgor is quite very powerful in battle. He already starts with a substantial level of armor. Further improving that is always going to be useful. And then at that point, you really want to improve Grimgor's survivability. So getting things like Scarred Veteran, Dodgy Geezer, because you're going to be dealing with quite a few missile units, like the Chaos Dwarves certainly have that. So that getting Dodgy Geezer, Scarred Veteran, and potentially Deadly Blade, dependent on how you want to view things. But yeah, you can spend 2 points in Deadly Blade, and at this point I'm rank 12. When you're rank 12, you obviously want to get all this, a lot of these skills. Like you want to get best of the best, absolutely, because you want to get that melee defense damage resistance, and you do want to get that hero capacity for Black Orc big bosses. You could skip on the Black Orc benefits until you actually recruit quite a few of them. But what you'd really want here is Imposing Presence for the Fear and Terror, and you want the Vitamin Shrooms, which is kind of funny because I'm pretty sure Mandalore Gaming made a joke about that. Now, here you may want to get from the front, but that's going to require you to get these other skills, but that's fine because it makes sense, and then get Foe Seeker. This will put you to rank 12. Now, I've skipped getting other army skills over here. The reason is, the logic of this particular decision is that when it comes to, say, the big lads benefit, well, trolls already have a good amount of melee attack and weapons room. They're not going to struggle for that, so getting the skill early on is not really too important. But once you're at rank 19, sure, getting the big lads and getting get back here, and at this point you're probably going to have a decent amount of stone trolls, so going all the way over here to get sneaky stabbers, and then get Smash Them Faster, and then of course get things like hard lads and biggest and strongest. I would not bother too much with artillery. Artillery is something that in a Greenskin campaign you could actually avoid altogether in the campaign itself, because generally speaking, what's the value of artillery for the Greenskins? It's not necessarily going to be field battles, because it's not the best in field battles. The value is in sieges, but Greenskins already have good siege tactics with the trolls and with Grimgor himself smashing through the gates. So instead, I would focus on upgrading the trolls, upgrading the orc units, and at this point at rank 27, you could also, of course, get full on with the boys to upgrade your Black Orcs that you may be able to get at this point. Getting Mentor as well, because the benefit to Mentor is also the character experience for the heroes in Grimgor's army. Getting Thick-Skinned, Hard to Hit, and Deadly Onslaught. This puts you at rank 36. What you want to focus on and how much you want to focus on it depends on what you're facing. Like if, say, you're dealing with Colic, then maybe improving Grimgor's melee skill is worth it as opposed to improving the army, because you just want that dueling ability against Colic. Generally speaking, I would argue, though, that improving the army is generally more useful, because Grimgor already has a substantial amount of melee capability. Having Deadly Onslaught will, of course, help, but spending all these skills for armor hard to hit is not necessarily the priority. Now, after this point, what do you do? Well, you should get Ravager, because one of the main benefits for Greenskins is that they can earn an absurd amount of money from sacking settlements. You can always loot a settlement, occupy and loot it, but I would not necessarily do it for anything other than a provincial capital, just to get it at a higher level, or at the same level, because Greenskins apparently have a chance to capture a settlement at the same level. But most of the time, you're going to want to sack the settlements, especially the minor settlements, because whether or not it's tier 2 or tier 3, it's not really too important, because it's very easy for Greenskins, and you'll earn an absurd level of money from sacking it. So further improving that is important in your campaign. Don't bother with income from raiding, and at this point you still need to spend 1 skill point to unlock further in the blue skill line. So maybe you want just 1 point in Looter, going into Iron Hard, and then over here going into Mob Boss, or if you need the ambush success chance, or defense chance. Yeah, ambush success chance, funnily enough, not ambush defense. Okay, so this is actually useless because you're never going to use ambush as Grimgor. So really here, maybe a point in Lightning Strike, or maybe a point in Lightning Strike over here, or maybe 2 points, and getting Renowned and Fear for the campaign movement range especially. The upkeep benefit is not too important, but 5% campaign movement range is not something to laugh at. And then 2 points in Mentor. You could always get Bellower or Hatred if you so desire. Like maybe at one point just sneak in a point of Hatred if you just want that extra weapon strength. And this leaves you with 1 further point. So maybe, just spending another point in Lightning Strike or another point in Looter, whatever you desire. But I would say with Grimgor, the important thing is getting the Gobos, then saving up for a special skill line, and then getting a balance between his melee skill line and his red skill line, with the added benefit of eventually getting the Ravager. Or you could ignore improving his melee skill line or the army skill line if you're just sweeping aside the mountains more, because there's no faction really that's going to stop you in the mountains more, with the exception of course, Greases. And Greases, to be quite blunt about it, is pathetic, so maybe vastly improving the amount of income you're earning early on from sacking settlements is the smarter play. Looking at Azag the Slaughter, same idea, Inspiring Presence, and Root Marcher. And here you do have an interesting choice to make with Azag, because Azag does get a bunch of benefits for big guns. Like with Grimgor, it's Black Orcs, right? So Grimgor, if you're playing Grimgor, you do want to get the Gobos. But with Azag, you can make the argument reasonably so that he gets so many benefits for his special skill line for Orc boys that it might, and Orc units in general, that you could actually go with a full-on Orc army for him. So going with that theme, what you do, you would go into the boys. Just keep in mind that Goblin units still have their advantages, in the sense that the scrap upgrades are available earlier on. They get a bunch of research benefits early on in the campaign, as opposed to Orcs, which are more late on. But still, you can get quite a few benefits. Like if you decide to go with a full-on Orc army for Azag, or just, recruit a couple Goblin units in the first few turns until you can recruit Orc Archer boys, which are better baseline than Goblin Archers. But if you do decide to go with that, then going with the boys is smart things, or you can still go with the Goblins. And at this point, just save up until rank 12. Now, he does have a magic skill line, but it is generally not worth it at all to invest in it, as opposed to his melee skill line and the army skill line. You can get the magic for other means, and you certainly will have things to spend with with your one's magic. You start with a shaman, so you already have a magic user in his army from the very start. So focusing on magic, especially this kind of magic, is really not worth it from my perspective with Azak. Just my point of view on the subject. Maybe a point in Spirit Leech and Life Leeching if you so desire, but instead just save up until rank 12 and then go further. But after rank 12, you would get Blade Master, Scarred Veteran, Dodgy Geezer, that puts you in rank 10. And at rank 11, you get the ability to get Unwitted to give him a leadership benefit. And then we're looking at the special skill line, but again, as I emphasize, you always want to save for the special skill line unless it's completely worthless. So over here, this is where all the big orc benefits come for Azak. So you get the minus 25% upkeep for all orc and big gun infantry and cavalry units, frenzy for all orc and big gun cavalry units. So then a melee defense, speed benefit based missile damage for orc archer boys and savage archer boys, hero capacity for shamans, vanguard deployment for orcs, and then melee attack and charge bonus, and then finally darkest nimbus. So all of these things are worth it. Like, you get the Wind of Death bound spell. Just to give you an idea, that is actually more powerful than anything you might get in his magic skill line. And you also get Skull Mancha by rank 18. So buffing his melee capability and his special skill line and getting the boys might be the play for Azak. Just keep in mind that you might have to run back and forth to recruit orc boys, or have a lord recruiting orc boys, because you're not going to start with the capability of getting orc archer boys. So you might just want to get a couple of goblin archers early on and then switch on full on to the boys for him. After this, once you're rank 18 with him, you might just go with a full on orc army, or you can just get full on Deadly Blade into Foe Seeker, Thick-Skinned, Hard to Hit, Deadly Onslaught, ignore the Magic Tree, ignore Bellower, it's not too important, I'd argue. Get the big lads, get back here, and get the hard lads, so you don't need the sneaky stabbers. You can go full on with the hard lads and bigger and stronger, and smash them faster. And then Ravager, Looter, Ironheart, Mob Boss, Lightning Strike into Renowned and Feared. This puts you at rank 42, getting Mentor at this point, maybe even maxing out Looter if you so desire, getting Woundmaker potentially, and Choppas as well. And that puts you at rank 50 for Azak. You could ignore going for orc units though with Azak, at least early on, and only get big guns. Like, with Azak, you're not necessarily looking to have the most powerful army, but if you can get them an army made up of like orc archer boys or savage orc archer boys with big guns in this army can be effective. So yeah, focusing on orcs is the smarter play. I think Azak is the exception, because most of the time with Greenskins campaigns you want to focus on goblins because generally they're the better units. But with Azak, because of the upkeep benefit, the frenzy benefit, the melee defense, base missile damage, it ends up in a case where he's the only one where you actually want to use orc units. Maybe Grumgor could use that, really, because Grumgor hates goblins, so he should have a reason to go with a full-on orc army. He only has a reason to go for black orcs. He doesn't have a reason to go for biggins or orc archer boys. Then we look at Grom the Paunch, same notion over here. Like, he's absolutely going for the gobos. And then, yeah, you do want to get that special skill line over here. But interesting enough, he does have down to size over here. So at rank 6, you would get that for the melee attack and bonus versus large, which is a great cavalry bonus considering where he actually starts over here. And then, yeah, you would save up until rank 12. But you would get Blade Master, Dodgy Geezer, Scarred Veteran, and Goblin Tide. Now, Goblin Tide is arguably the most important skill that you can get in a Greenskin campaign, because that 15 armor for goblin units counts for a lot. By the way, you would want the leadership benefit, the growth and casualty replenishment, although you could live without it, to be honest with you. But it is 15 growth in all provinces. You want to understand why Grom is so absurd as a legendary lord, why his campaign kind of works and doesn't at the same time, even though he has a lot of territory around him that isn't suitable climate. It's like, he kind of doesn't give a shit, basically. Like, if Grom was in an area where all the climate around him was suitable, he would be the most powerful, but he's not, unfortunately. Now, for the other skills, you could go for the HP, but what you really want over here is boisterous shakedown. So income from post-battle loot, sacking settlements into roll them over. So you get the rattled effect, and then coming back once you start dealing with elves, and then of course hit points. Chariots, not really that big of a benefit, I'd argue, in terms of using chariots, to be honest, or pump wagons, so I would not necessarily bother with those. For all the benefits that he has in his campaign, I would not necessarily bother recruiting them. Though you could, but they're obviously going to be limited in sieges, so I would not necessarily bother with this particular skill line, unless you plan on getting quite a few chariots, and you never would get quite a few chariots, so not really worth investing into. Instead, I would get the big lads over here, and then get language of the boys, which is leadership, malevolence, immune to psychology. Get sneaky stabbers. Get the great one is here for the melee attack, leadership, and base weapon damage benefit. The biggest and strongest, and maybe you even want to get Black Orcs in his army, though keep in mind he does have quite a few goblin benefits in his army, so you could potentially play with Nasty Skulkers for his for the entire campaign, or eventually could switch on to Black Orcs if you so desire for his army. By the way, going at that point, like at this point, you may want to get Deadly Blade, Foe Seeker, Thick-Skinned, Hard to Hit, Deadly Onslaught, and then of course Ravager, Looter, Iron Hard, Mob Boss, Lightning Strike, into Renowned and Feared, and then yeah, Woundmaker. Don't bother with Tunnel Boss, you're not really going to use it, and of course Mentor if you really want to benefit the heroes and other lords in your campaign. And then finally Chappas, and maybe another point in Lightning Strike as well. Or you could use some of these points to upgrade the Orc Infantry units with regards to it. Though, to be quite honest with you, I think Black Orcs, even if you don't have the skill, would probably still be worth it. And you're always going to benefit from the Gobos because of the Goblin Archers. Keep in mind, Goblin Tide will not work with 9 Goblin units. Then moving on to Warzag. Now, Warzag is in an interesting spot because he's obviously going to buff Savage Orc, so that's what you want to focus on in his army. Like, you want to get the boys free points. Or you could focus on his magic skill line, though keep in mind the early battles you're fighting as Warzag, like, don't confederate the initial Greenskin faction, wipe them out yourself, because they're not worth confederating. You're actually going to gain more experience, money, if you actually do wipe them out in the traditional manner. Like, you should only confederate the major Greenskin faction. Like this, I mention this because Warzag has a lot of opportunities for confederation early on by beating up the faction leaders. It's generally not worth going for. Instead, going for direct conquest is a smart choice, and then going for Barakvar, wiping out the dwarf capital. But yeah, getting the boys is the smart thing to do. And otherwise, you'd obviously focus on the magic skill line, Brainbuster, Power of the Wa, or just one point in Brainbuster, then Power of the Wa. You would get the mount unlocked at this particular point. And while you certainly can get the Foot of Gork very, very quickly with Warzag, you're not really going to be able to use it as much. Winds of Magic is going to be a bit of a problem in his campaign. But so instead I'd get Magical Reserves, Erding, and this puts you at rank 12. Though you'd obviously get these magic skills after you've gotten the rank 12 skills. So melee attack, further melee attack for savage or cavalry units, magical attacks for his entire army, speed, melee defense, physical resistance for trolls, giants, Ragnarok spires, and rogue idols, and then of course the winds of magic cost. And this is the point where you get the Foot of Gork, and you get the full-on upgraded, so you get the significant cast reduction cost for the Foot of Gork, and then you can obviously get the other spells. Like you should get the big lads, get back here, and just a balance between between magical skills and army skills. So like hard lads, biggest and stronger, smash them faster. This puts you at rank 30, getting Mentor, Ravager, Looter, Ironheart, Mob Boss, Lightning Strike, and into Renowned and Feared. And I would not necessarily worry about Headbutt, because I think like Headbutt, when you've got all these other spells, is just not worth bothering with. So what would I do with the other skills that Warzak does have? Well, maybe Tunnel Boss could be worth it, though I generally don't think so. Usually speaking, like it's just a leadership benefit during subterranean siege battles. The dwarves are going to roll over very, very quickly in a campaign. And the Skaven have shit leadership anyway. So Mentor, maybe maximizing Looter, Mentor, and potentially getting the artillery benefit, or at least getting the Savage Smarts benefit over here. That might very well be worth it. And yeah, full on Lightning Strike. And that's really about it. Like what you want to do with the remaining points is your choice. Personally, I don't think I don't think there's a lot of things that are worth getting over here. Maybe just a Bellower benefit, but that would really be about it, or just full on maximizing def from above. Finally, Skarsnik, who's the worst legendary lord of the Greenskins by far. Well, his Night Goblin benefits are worthless. Better night sneaking. Okay, let's go with that. So you would get Room Archer, Inspiring Presence, and then better night sneaking. The Death Juice stacks, they're not necessarily that great, so I would instead get Gobos. The ambush success chance and melee attack benefit during ambushes, like, this is the thing about Skarsnik. He's really designed in a lot of ways to have a stock chance, but he doesn't have a stock chance in his campaign. Like, he could really, really use it, I would argue. Until Creative Assembly makes that change, like, getting all the ambush benefits is just not really going to be worth it in Skarsnik's campaign. You're the Greenskins. You're the biblical tide of death. You don't ambush enemies. You just straight up walk to them and murder them. That's the problem in Skarsnik's campaign. It's, like, really outdated. It was designed in a different era. So instead, you could get the Death Juice attacks. Like, improving Squigs, not really worth it. So Dodgy Geezer, Blade Master, Scarred Veteran, and then you get his special skill line. Like, there's some useful stuff, like the Spite of the Bad Moon can be useful. Fermented Fungi can be nice to reduce melee defense of enemies. To Smart Hiding to give him physical resistance and speed. Steal, this skill, by the way, like underbosses, completely worthless, because you're only going to have one goblin big boss in your campaign for a while until you get to tier 4. Stealing experience from other lords is not a good benefit. It's a worthless benefit in Warhammer 3. It made sense in Warhammer 1 or 2, where really leveling the legendary lord to a high level as quickly as possible made sense, but it doesn't make sense over here. So instead, what you really want over here is you want Cough 'em Up, you want a Fermented Fungi, and the other things you could ignore, like especially ignore underbosses. It isn't a benefit. It might say, oh, you can recruit heroes, Night Goblin Shamans, and Province. Never recruit Night Goblin Shamans. They are completely and utterly worthless. Smart Hiding could be worth it, but yeah, there's other things you could get, like improving your trolls, getting trolls, because you do start with tier 2 settlement. So getting trolls quickly, getting Deadly Blade, Foe Seeker, get back here. So balancing it out. Like, Skarsnik isn't a great combatant, so maybe getting Stinky Stabbers faster is the smart thing. But yeah, just the balancing act here between the melee skill line and the red skill line. Red skill line, and then yeah, maybe getting Savage Smarts. Death from Above, Ravager, Looter, just 1 point in ready and waiting. Just 1 point over there, but you can get that 15% campaign movement range. And in fact, maybe it would be worth it to just sacrifice the melee skill line to get that blue skill line faster in his campaign. Maybe it would even be worth it to sacrifice the red skill line just to get that 15% campaign movement range, because moving around the map faster is worth it. But yeah, Mob Boss, Renowned and Feared, and that would be about it. What you do with his other points, like getting Mentor, potentially getting, well, what would you get? The Nasty Skulker, and that would put you at rank 50. And that's the Legendary Lords of the Greenskins. Now, moving on to regular Lords and Heroes, we first have the Night Goblin War Boss. But the Night Goblin War Boss is absolutely not worth using as a Lord choice in any particular campaign, because he's not that great in combat. A regular Orc War Boss will do better, nor does he have such a good special skill line. Like his skills, like, oh, he gets a Great Cave Squig Mount. Yeah, you want to know what a good mount is? It's a Wyvern. That's a much better choice as a mount. And he has this ambush benefit, but one, you're never really going to want to use ambushes that much as a greenskin, and two, when you're thinking about it, like, you just don't benefit too much from this particular skill because it's very situational. Even when you do get an ambush, how much are you going to benefit from that particular skill? So you're just not really benefiting from having a Night Goblin War Boss at all as a Lord option. So just completely skip it, because the other two are much better. Now, the Goblin Great Shaman, that's a different discussion. With the Goblin Great Shaman, you go with Brute Marcher, Inspiring Presence. If you're getting a Goblin Great Shaman, you're getting goblins, plain and simple. So getting gobos, getting sneaky stabbing, maybe even sneaky stealing as well, would be worth it. Then there's various debuffs you can apply. Itchy Nuisance can be worth it, Vindictive Glare, but really what you're doing over here, you're just spending points until you can get the Goblin Hide for that 15 armor and melee attack. And then also, don't even try it, Dodgy Geezer. And after that, combination of spells like Curse of the Bad Moon, Magical Reserves, Earthing Arcane Conduit, Night Shroud. It can sometimes be worth it, but most of the time it is not. And what you really want to do with the Goblin Great Shaman is to get the Ragnarok Spider, because that's pretty damn useful for the cooldown to hold spells, wins a magic cost to hold spells, and the Ragnarok itself is pretty substantial. And I would not necessarily bother with Gork Will Fix It, because very, very situational. Can help you with charges, against charges, maybe just spending a point if you're dealing with a lot of cavalry. If you're not, then yeah, it's absolutely not worth it. And then just get the big lads in to get back here. Sneaky Stabbers, biggest and strongest, smash them faster. And then lower on Ravager, Looter, Ironheart, Mob Boss, Lightning Strike 1 or 2 points, 1 point, Renowned and Fear, Lightning Strike, and of course, Mentor over here. And that's kind of where we stop. Like, the long-term potential just isn't necessarily there. I mean, later on, you could actually use a Goblin Great Shaman because you do have the skill to go full-on Black Orcs, a combination of Goblins and Black Orcs. Keep in mind, the Goblin Tide does not affect Night Goblin units. And yeah, buff up Looter, more points in Mentor, and that would be about it. As for the Orc War Boss, well, he doesn't have any special skill line, but he's just like a big dumb brute. So what you want to do with an Orc War Boss, my perspective on an Orc War Boss is, if you're getting an Orc War Boss, you're probably skipping out on Goblins, right? But you could still get Goblins. However, the way I view an Orc War Boss, Like, unless you're getting one early just because of the extra combat potential, because an Orc War boss will just do better in battle than a Goblin Great Shaman, plain and simple. Even with the Ragnarok Spider, because you do have this melee skill line for the Orc War boss. So if you're getting him early, yeah, maybe then getting the Gobos. And you're still going to want to use Goblin Archers later on, because Goblin Fanatic Archers, they're plainly better than Orc Archers for the most part. But you could always go for the boys if you so desire. But really here, it is a balance between the army skills and his melee skill line. So once you get like 4 trolls in army, getting that and just buffing those trolls with biggest and strongest and the big lads is probably a smart thing to do. But yeah, mainly what you're getting here is the Wyvern mount, as well as the melee capability that this guy has to offer. And of course, Ravager, Luther, Ironheart, Mob Boss, Lightning Strike, Renowned and Feared, Woundmaker, Choppa, and of course, Mentor. What you decide to do with all the other points in the very long term is your particular choice. Finally, with respect to heroes, well, I would completely ignore the Night Goblin Shaman. It's never worth it because the hero capacity for Night Goblin Shamans, it's split with regular Shamans, and regular Orc Shamans are just flat out the better choice. They're more mobile on the battlefield, which is actually quite important for a caster hero because otherwise they can die very, very quickly. So the Night Goblin Shamans are far more vulnerable, will die easier, they don't have as good spells. And besides, you can always get a Lord that gives you these spells with the Great Shaman, so why bother with the Night Goblin Shamans? Answer is you shouldn't. So with the Orc Shamans, you want to balance it out between getting as many points in scouting as possible with, of course, getting the magic spell. So with the magic spells, 1 point in Gaze of Mork, 1 point in Brainbuster, Power of the Wa, and then maxing out Brainbuster, or getting a point in Fists of Gork, if you so desire, because getting those magical attacks can be worth it. So just balancing out. If you need a lot of magic power very, very quickly, then obviously focusing on the magic skill line and ignoring scouting is worth it. But most of the time, getting scouting is the smarter decision because, yeah, you do want those magic items. And then, yeah, Brainbuster, Dodge Geezer, Evasion, into magical reserves, then Foot of Gork, Erding, getting Foot of Gork fully buffed up, and then yeah, just maximizing everything over here, scouting as well. Ignore everything else. Like, you could potentially use research technology, but the other skills are just not really going to be worth it. Hell, Headbutt itself is not really going to be worth it in any real way. Then we have the Black Orc Big Boss, who provides training. So generally speaking, you want to get that. Then Dead Hard, though he does have a choice here in terms of skill line. I would get Thick Skin. You might even want to have this guy on foot as opposed to on a board, though obviously the more board gives you extra mobility. But yeah, but mounted heroes tend to do worse in pure combat than on foot most of the time. Though obviously the extra mobility is important. Whether or not you want to keep him mounted or on foot, that's your choice. But anyway, you get Thick-Skinned, you get training, Heroic Killing Blow, Dodgy Geezer, 1 point hard to hit, finish off training, get back here, and you want to get to rank 14 to get his special skills. And then once you're rank 14, you get back on your feet. Even if you're not using any Orc units in the army, it's still worth getting this hero. And here you have a choice. It depends on the army he's attached to. So if you've got a lot of Orc units, getting one Black Orc Big Boss with Boss of the Field for the Vigor loss reduction can obviously be very powerful. Otherwise, ignore one Orc army because it's generally not worth it to engage with these actions as opposed to having him on the battlefield. Usually, though, Line Cracker is the better choice, and then yeah, Armed to the Teeth. But if you have a full-on army of Orc units, like if you're playing as Azag, or if you have an Orc War boss and you decide to focus on Orc units, and including archers, then yeah, getting the vigor loss reduction or getting at least one of these guys for that kind of army may be worth it. But Line Cracker for Deadly Onslaught is the smart thing. And returning to the melee skill line, you want to go into Smash them faster for the leadership and crucially the melee attack. So this guy is really going to buff your orc units, and he's really going to buff your melee units with the skills he has available. And once you get all of this, yeah, get Woundmaker. You could even get the Crack Some Heads if you so desire, and you should obviously. And then, you know, maximize Hard to Hit, Mentor, Deadly Blade. When it comes to heroes, like obviously you're going to spend the points, if only to get Mentor, I gotta say, not for any other unit, any other reason. But effectively, like once you've gotten like Deadly Blade and all these skills over here, then yeah, the points are just fluff. You're spending them however way you want. Then the Giant River Troll Hag. With the Giant River Troll Hag, especially getting replenishing troops whenever possible is very important. I would not bother too much with our magic skill line because you can get Giant River Troll Hags at the same tier as you can get Shamans. Guess what? Shamans are better. I would instead focus on her survivability because she's a melee hero. So getting Horrid Mass, getting melee attack, a bit of speed over here into like Slimy Shanks, this and the skills over here. Like you want to get Tenacity, Hard to Hit, Deadly Onslaught, Dodgy Geezer, Teach 'em Right, and to get the Horrible Smell to reduce leadership. Now, once you've gotten all of this and maximized Hard to Hit, and obviously you're getting these replenished troops whenever possible. Like the main role of a Giant River Troll Hag is to get the replenished troops. So whenever you can spend a point in replenishing troops, you get that point as opposed to anything else. There's very, very few situations where not getting replenishing troops makes sense. And this applies to any hero that has replenishing troops. So the first point is at rank 2, the second point at rank 5. So over here, the correct way would be to spend 2 points in Wild Eye. Then the third, Devastating Charge, that would be rank 9. Tenacity, 1 point, and then the second point over there, that's rank 11. Hard to Hit, Deadly Onslaught, Slimy Shanks, Dodgy Geezer, Teach 'em Right. And that is effectively it for the Greenskins. Now, once you get the melee skill line, obviously for the Giant River Troll Hag, that's when you can bother with the spells. Or you could go all the way, or you could get, you know, just Hard Mass, and then instead of getting the melee skill, is get the spell skill line. There's pros and cons with this. Like, if you're playing Grom's campaign, because he obviously starts with one, it might be worth it in his particular campaign, because he's obviously not going to get Caster for a while. But in every other campaign, you're going to get these Giant River Troll Hags at about the same time as a Shaman. Your wins of magic are better spent with a Shaman, though there are obviously benefits with the aspect of a Dread Knight and other things as well. Cosine here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.